All right, so this is the first lecture for PE 381 where we're actually going over content as opposed to like just administrative stuff. And really what this one is it's just a review of some of the important basics for PE from PE 220. So if you haven't had PE 220 from me, so your introductory physiology class, this will hopefully get you in the right mindset. So to start off, we're just going to have several definitions here. So to start off, what is physiology? Now, for those of you that took PE 220 from me, the book itself says the study of the chemistry and physics of the structures of the body. It's absolutely correct, but it's a little too technical for me. So when I think of physiology, I just think of how is the body working? Remember that anatomy is structure, physiology is the function. So how those structures work together to sustain life. Now, when it comes to exercise, it's just some sort of intentional activity. And really, when it comes to exercise, when we think of it, we're talking about an intentional activity that we're doing that will increase our level of fitness and health. It's something that's intentional. We don't just exercise on accident, at least not that I'm aware of. And so that leads us to exercise physiology, which is how is physiology altered when we exercise? So it's one of many different types of subsets of physiology, but that's what we're going to focus on is exercise physiology. Now, when it comes to physiology, really what we're always trying to do, and when I say I'm just meaning what our body's trying to do is maintain homeostasis. And remember, homeostasis is this big, overarching, global perspective, like it says here, where we're trying to maintain physiology or a function to be compatible with life. We're trying to maintain a stable internal environment, but in order to do this, we have a dynamic equilibrium. And we regulate this equilibrium or this homeostasis with feedback loops. Okay? And so when we talk about dynamic equilibrium, what we're really saying is that there's a range, right? There's not just a specific set point. So the example I use all the time is core temperature. Our core temperature, we don't maintain at 37 degrees Celsius, which is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Meaning if we get just above that, we start to sweat. If we get just below that, we start to shiver. We've got a couple tenths of a degree range before anything starts to happen. Okay, and so the last half of this little lecture, we're just talking about homeostatic mechanisms. And we want to talk about these specifically as they relate to exercise. So hopefully you remember from your undergraduate physiology class that we've got two different ways that we can send signals. Okay, and so we've got the nervous system, sorry, can't draw very straight, and then we've got the endocrine system. They both are communication pathways. One's faster than the other, one's longer lasting than the other, but we use both of these so that we can maintain homeostasis. All right, generally we use a negative feedback loop, so we're trying to bring things back down to normal. But in some cases, we use positive feedback loops even during exercise, which will actually amplify changes. And so I'm going to give you an example of each of these three things. So the first one here is involving the nervous system. So when we begin exercise, you got to remember that exercise is a stressor. It actually takes us out of homeostasis. One of the things that starts to happen when we exercise is that our oxygen delivery is low. Okay, if nothing else changes and I start to run or bike or whatever it is, the amount of oxygen that's being delivered to my tissues is not high enough to meet my demand. And so one of the ways that I can compensate for this is I can increase my heart rate. And this increased heart rate, which will increase cardiac output, will allow more oxygen to be delivered in order to meet demand. Once I meet demand, my heart rate stops increasing. And so at that point, I stay constant. I reach what's called steady state that we'll talk about in a few weeks. But I'm no longer increasing my heart rate, but I'm at a point where I'm maintaining oxygen delivery. Now, that's not to say that this is the only thing that happens. Obviously, when I exercise, one of the things that happens so I can deliver more oxygen is I breathe more, so I bring more oxygen into my body. Now, another example with the endocrine system, again, exercise starts. Well, maybe my blood glucose starts to decrease because I'm using all of this glucose in my muscles so I can go run a 10K at the NCAA championships like these individuals are doing here. All right. So as a result, my pancreas will release glucagon, and glucagon causes glycogen to be broken down from the liver, which will increase blood glucose. Okay, and that will continue until my blood glucose levels are back to normal. Okay, the final example that I want to talk about is a positive feedback loop. Now, I want you to think for a second, what happens to your heart rate just before you begin to exercise? So let's just say you're one of these individuals here. I believe this is at the Olympics, but you're one of these individuals on the blocks. What's going on with their heart rate as they're sitting on the blocks? Well, it's going up. Okay, and part of this might be due to some anxiety, some anxiousness, that sort of thing. But part of it is just it's the body getting prepared for exercise. The primary motor cortex is letting the cardiovascular centers know, hey, we're getting ready. The muscles are getting ready to work harder than normal, so they're going to need extra oxygen. Okay, and so help me out here. And so the heart rate increases. And so those are just some basic examples, some primary examples of feedback loops that we've got that occur during exercise. We'll talk about this more in class and go over more specific examples. But if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. The last thing I want to do is I want to go back to this slide here. I want you to know that as we go through all these lectures, especially for those of you that haven't had a class from me, is I have these slides scattered throughout. Okay, for most of these mini lectures, there will be one, maybe two slides that have this. These are the objectives and the topics and the outcomes that I write my exam questions off of. Okay, and so that will help you prepare for the exam. It will also let you know what I'm looking for from students as we go throughout this class. All right, so that is all for the first lecture.